The deadline for nearly 12,000 TTC workers to walk off the job is midnight tonight, and there are a lot of questions about a plan if a deal cannot be reached. So we are joined live now in studio by TTC spokesperson Stuart Green to talk more about the contingency plans as well as how negotiations are going at this point. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
First of all, we'll start off with contingency plans if indeed there is a strike. Is it even possible to have a plan in place to try to ease the impact of a strike?
So I need to preface everything by saying that we're still at the table, and in labor negotiations, that's exactly where you want to be. You want to be at the table bargaining. There's good faith, there's progress. We've managed to reach some side agreements. We announced recently that Wheel-Trans service would continue in the unlikely event of a strike. We've also made arrangements with the union so that they will return all of the buses and vehicles to the garages in the event of a labor disruption so that nobody's left stranded. So there are some side deals that we've made. The progress is good, but you're quite right. If 11,500 people walk off the job, there simply will be no TTC service. I know it's not what anybody wants to hear, but we have to be honest with people and say that that does remain a possibility. Again, we are still at the table, and we're hoping for a resolution. We think we can do that. It's going to go down to the wire. There's no question. It will be midnight tonight, as we saw with the QP Local 2 settlement, went past the midnight deadline. So we are expecting to go down to the wire, as they say. We'd like to have something sooner than later to announce, but if we don't, it'll be overnight that we announce something. In terms of contingency, really what we're looking at now is how we would staff stations, for example. You and I were speaking earlier about what do you do if somebody shows up at a station and they're unaware of a strike. We are planning for that contingency. There's no contingency in terms of delivering transit service because we simply don't have the operators, the mechanics, the janitors, all those people who do the important frontline work. So really it's about making sure that customers are aware, so communicating with customers, getting notices out there using social media and the websites, and having staff at stations just in the event somebody shows up unaware that there's a labor disruption. However, we are optimistic that we can get there. It's just going to take us some time. It's going to take the rest of the day.
Right. And the optimism, I know it's something that has been shared by TTC Chair Jamal Myers earlier this week, by Mayor Olivia Chow as well. When we asked the president of local ATU 113 about that optimism, he had a completely different vantage point. He said that he doesn't know where that optimism is coming from because there were some major issues that really were not being put on paper. Is that optimism at this point, is it just more of a hope, or do you see a path forward in the negotiations?
So, I mean, let's remember that, you know, Marvin, we have a good relationship with Marvin and his team. You know, he's got a job to do. He's got some things that he wants to accomplish, and we understand and respect that. It's part of the bargaining process. But our optimism is rooted in things like, I mentioned, the Wheel-Trans agreement, the agreement not to leave people stranded in the event of a stoppage, but also the fact that we've settled 3 contracts with other unions this year alone, including 2 large QP locals, which and QP are tough negotiators. So, you know, we have the precedent. We have the ability to reach these agreements with our union partners. That's where the optimism comes from. It's not just bluster. We actually believe that there's a path to a settlement. It's just going to take us probably the rest of today.
Okay, and like you were saying, if it does even take past the midnight deadline, if it's a few hours after that, yeah, it's something that you'll stay at the table and try to work on. If it does take, let's say, a few hours after that midnight deadline, what happens then for the morning commute? Do you think that there will be a delay? Do you predict that there will be a delay in that commute and getting things sorted?
Yeah, we don't. I mean, we're a 24-hour operation, so we have people working around the clock anyway. The only way there's any disruption is if there is an actual strike. If there's no strike, people just continue doing their jobs, and that will carry on. You know, the good news about tomorrow is that it's a PA day in Toronto, as you've been mentioning. So we expect lower than usual ridership. You know, we're using all of our communications channel, get the message out there to have people prepared that if you're planning on taking transit Thursday night into Friday morning, if you're an overnight worker, if you have an event to go to, maybe plan ahead. I know it's not the ideal message, but we have to be honest with people that, you know, if you're going to be out overnight tonight into tomorrow, there is that slight chance that, you know, you may not have transit service. So, you know, stay tuned to, you know, your channel and others, our social media, and just make sure that you're kept informed, because that's the best way we can let people know.
And again, if someone is on a bus or a streetcar, let's say that is a 24-hour route, those operators will finish that route if there is a strike.
Yeah, so the agreement that we reached yesterday with the union was that they would continue service until about 3 a.m. So our advice to people is, if you are going to be out, if you are going to be on transit, in those early morning hours tomorrow, try and wrap up your trip before 3 a.m., maybe 2:30. But the union has agreed with us that they will not leave people stranded, and that was very important, just to give that certainty. So they'll wrap up those routes. They'll get people to a terminal point. If you're on a bus route, you'll probably get to complete your route. The ridership numbers at that time of night are very low. There are 2,000 to 3,000 people that are on the system-wide, but it could be a huge inconvenience to people. So, but the union has partnered with us to make sure that nobody is left stranded.
All right, and lastly, again, we're trying to see the optimism in this, but if indeed we see the first strike that we have seen in more than a decade, is the TTC prepared for that kind of paralyzing of the city? Because we've seen it before where, back in 2008, it didn't last long, but it doesn't take much to really throw things off here in the city when it comes to transit disruptions and delays. A complete stoppage is a whole other situation.
Yeah, I mean, some of us are old enough to remember 2008. I was working at the mayor's office at the time, so I remember it very well. It is incredibly, it's a huge inconvenience. That was a different negotiation. Those were different times. There's far more goodwill. I think we're almost there. I don't want to jinx it, but there just is reason for optimism. But we just need to have people prepared that there is that chance that things could. There could be a strike.
All right,
Yeah.
Just realistic for those commuters.
To be, we can't hide that.
All right. We'll be in touch with you, of course, over the next 24 hours and more for sure. Stuart Green, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tammie.